I just feel like we are surrounded in this world by bullshit.
So how can you know what's real and what's not? Science versus. That's how. We answer questions like, does anti-aging skincare actually work? And what is your true personality type? And to answer these questions, we don't use opinions. We dive into the scientific studies, talk to the experts, and put it in a podcast that I know you are gonna love. Listen to Science Versus on Spotify.
Welcome to
4Kids Flashback. Hello, welcome to the 4Kids Flashback podcast. I'm Tara Sands, joined by
Steve Yurko.
Whoa, Steve Yurko. There is a bug flying around in my booth, and I thought I got it, but I'm not sure.
Spring
and I'm going to
here.
I think it's like a moth. I'm going to spend this whole interview looking for it.
I was trying to walk out like a door earlier, and there's like the giant mosquito was kind of flying around. It's the giant ones that don't suck your blood, I think, but they're still kind of.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's the small ones that do. The big ones, but they're still kind of like, it was just flying in the vicinity of the doorknob. And I was like, come on.
I'm going to go on record. I'm an animal lover, but you know what? I don't feel bad when a mosquito dies.
I think now we're animal rights activists might come after us, but like houseflies and moths, nah.
Yeah, no.
But like a spider, I'll try to save a spider.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll put it outside. I'm like, no, you help.
Yes, you're doing good, spider. A ladybug, never. I wouldn't.
Never.
But
Isn't that like bad luck?
And that is not a good segue, but I'm very excited about our guest today.
Speaking of creatures.
Creatures, as someone who worked for a company that had a lot of creatures in their content. No, there's no segue. There's no good segue. Gail Tilden is going to be on the show today. I'm so excited she agreed to do this. She's kind of like a legend in this business. She's seen Nintendo. I mean, I'll say all this in the interview, but like she saw Nintendo become Nintendo.
Mm-hmm. And, like, if you know anything about her, like, the games that she was involved with are, some big freaking deals back in the late
legendary
90s. Yeah.
Yeah. Oof.
But,
I mean, I don't want to... Yeah, sorry.
Was she the one that, like, kind of, like, we talked about, kind of helped with naming some of the Pokemon for English? Or?
I'm going to ask about this, but I learned in the book that I'm reading, Monster Kids, there was a group assigned to that, but she was around during that time, and I'm very interested to see if she got any input into that. She was not one of the people named that was in charge of it, but I mean, I have to believe she was around and maybe was like, hey, I like Squirtle or whatever. So we'll see. I'm super, super psyched to talk to someone who really was there from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Intriguing.
Donkey Kong, Pokémon. I mean, just so many different things she was there for. The NES. She was the one in charge of Nintendo Power publication. So all sorts of stuff. But I will let her do the talking. I'm excited for her to also explain what a marketing person does, because it's a job that could mean several different things, especially with a company that has its fingers in so many pies. That's a weird analogy. But, because there were the cards, the games, the show, there's marketing encompasses so much. Speaking of marketing, we should market our podcast. How do we do that?
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to the show. If it's your first time listening to us, or you just need a little reminder, you could find out all about us over at 4kidsflashback.com. It's with the number 4 in the URL. Subscribe, rate, listen to us on wherever you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcast, Spotify. Just look us up.
It's all on the website.
Yes.
There's a list of where to subscribe. And then you could, if you want your episodes early and ad-free before everyone else gets them, how does that happen?
Well, if you go over to Patreon and you kick us some money over there and become a patron, you get episodes a week early, ad-free.
Yeah.
And plus a bunch of other bonus goodies.
For less than $1 an episode.
Yeah.
about for about $1 an episode, you can be listening to all this, plus all the bonus content and the Discord, which the Discord channel has been making me super happy. I love being able to interact with everyone directly. And also, when you guys do have questions, chances are some of these geniuses in our Discord channel will have the answer for you. They kind of know everything. They should be hosting this podcast, but please don't take our jobs. But yeah, check that out. And here's Gail Tilden. Our guest today is Gail Tilden. We're so excited to have her. This is our first guest from the Nintendo side of things. This is a podcast focused on 4Kids, but Nintendo is such a huge part of the 4Kids history that it would have been a huge mistake not to include speaking to someone like Gail. She started as the VP of Brand Management, worked on Nintendo Power, was in charge of so many Pokémon things. I'm going to let her explain that all to you and explain what a marketing manager does, since I don't really know. Welcome to the show, Gail.
Hi. Yeah, I started working at Nintendo in 1983, and I started as an advertising manager, but we just had arcade games and handheld games called Game & Watch. And then we launched the NES while I worked there. But when we got involved in a bigger way with licensing, there was a small licensing campaign around Donkey Kong in the early 80s, even when I started. But then after the NES launch was when Alcon, who was then working for a company called LCI, had presented an opportunity for Nintendo to license their characters on things outside of video games. So,
right. Okay. Now, I'd love to know a little bit about your background. Did you grow up interested in games, computers, advertising in general? How did you get to Nintendo in the first place?
So I was interested in advertising and marketing, but it's pretty tough in Seattle to get a job related to consumer marketing. We didn't have a lot of brands. Now people think, well, we have Microsoft, we have Starbucks, all these things, but not then. So one of my first jobs out of college was with Britannia Sportswear. And my boss there had moved to Nintendo, and she called me and said, I'd really like you to come over, and I'm going to be having a baby, and I've got to get you to come over right away. Do you know the Donkey Kong people? And that's how I started with Nintendo. But yeah, it was really exciting to work in advertising. And at Britannia, we also did some TV marketing, that kind of thing. So that was my start. And
okay, so you must send this kid a birthday card every year, because this kid being born really was your opening to get into Nintendo.
Yeah, that's true. John Simmons, if you're out there, thank you.
Shout out. So when you heard the Donkey Kong people, had you spent time in an arcade, or was that like there's always the idea of geek culture, or that was more for boys at that time? So what did you actually know about this world you were stepping into?
At that time, I don't think it was as male focused as it is now. It was really something that you played in a bar or a tavern, like as a college kid. And then also, so I liked Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man. My husband, who I met at that time, we liked Frogger. I did not like Donkey Kong. I wasn't good at it, the eye-hand coordination thing. But so I knew something about video games at that time, and the fact that I played them if I was out with my friends. We actually liked Pac-Man enough that I remember we would drive by this grocery store that had one, and sometimes we would go just for that.
See, I knew there was a gamer in you. Okay. Yeah. See, mine was Centipede. My proudest day still was getting my initials in the Centipede arcade game at the roller rink.
Ooh,
and nothing will top it.
Nothing.
Yeah. I peaked. Yeah. Okay. So you get this job at Nintendo, and so you're handling the products for Donkey Kong or the advertising for the game itself? Explain what a job like this does, because again, we've spoken to so many people on the, who are editors or writers or directors, but you're the first person that had a job like this.
Okay, so being in advertising at Nintendo when we had arcade games, what that meant was you went to trade shows. It's like business to business type of con. So we would go and display the latest game. The game that Nintendo was offering when I started was Donkey Kong 3. We had already introduced Donkey Kong 1, Donkey Kong Jr., and regular Mario Brothers. So we would make some brochures. We would go to a bunch of effort to show up at the con and have a display and try and encourage people to come try our game and purchase it for the roller rink or for some other location. And then the other side of what we were doing was these little teeny handheld games. It was a whole game inside of something, what size? Like 2.5 by 4 inches. And they're called Game & Watch. So think of like a Game Boy, but compact, just with single title. Right. And so the first commercials or anything I worked on was for those small handheld games. And then we had something like a little tabletop version of an arcade game that we did some advertising for. And those products, we did try as a small company to get them into toy stores like Toys R Us, et cetera. Even Walmart and Target didn't really exist at that time. So toy stores, et cetera. So we would do a lot of advertising trying to get the stores to carry the product. And then also some advertising directly to the kids or the consumers.
What was the target demographic for stuff like that?
I think that especially at that time, you could segment the way that you bought advertising. It was 2 to 5, 6 to 11, 12 to 17.
Right.
So
Right. It was very specific. Yeah.
So usually you would buy like a 6 to 11 and hope for some spillover because that was really the most efficient. You do things like buy advertising in after school programming. Again, now that we have things like cable TV and streaming, people don't do this so much, but you used to come home after school and have like a 2-hour block that was cartoons or reruns. I can remember like Laverne and Shirley or Happy Days or
the good stuff.
That kind of thing.
So were you beholden to, because we talk about 4Kids all the time being so beholden to the standards and practices rules and the kid vid rules about advertising to children. Since you were handling some of this, were the commercials themselves very beholden to strict rules?
Yes, very much so. There's something called like when you're being exhortative, when you're telling the child that they need to buy the product. And if it was a toyetic product, you weren't able to do something that involved a fantasy of using the product. Whereas if you were cereal, you can have Lucky Charms guy jump out of the cereal bowl. Somehow somehow that doesn't count. You can tell this still irritates me. But if the Lucky Charms guy was playing with your Game & Watch, that's a no-go.
And we're hoping to talk to someone soon from Standards and Practices to understand why, because it seems arbitrary so often. It's like, you're right, like a fantasy in this version, for cereal, but not for this game. So, okay, so you're learning all this on the job, it sounds like, because you came from a very different background. So you get to Nintendo, Donkey Kong's going on. Were they growing at a rapid pace at that point?
Not exactly. So my first couple years, really, we were riding the wave of the arcade games, but it kind of had slowed down. And in Japan, they had introduced the Famicom, which is their version of the NES. And so really it was probably almost 2 years later before we started working on that. And during the time we were working on it, the whole industry was falling apart. So it was a really interesting time. We were in the first 2 or 3 years, we were not growing at all until 1986, after we had already launched the NES and started to go national with it, that's when the companies started getting bigger.
Okay, because I was reading that around this time, like around 83, there was an oversaturation by unlicensed, like third-party games that kind of led to this demise of the industry. Is that what kind of affected you
I don't know
guys?
if they were only third-party, but they were not. Nintendo wasn't in the marketplace. It affected us because none of the retailers, let alone the families, didn't want to invest a bunch of money in something that wasn't going to last or wasn't very interesting.
Okay. And I know you started doing the Nintendo Power. Was that happened a little bit later, or is this all kind of happening at the same time?
No, that started in 1988. So the NES launched in New York in the fall of 85. So I didn't move to start the magazine until afterward.
Okay. So the NES is your next big project as an advertising executive. Yeah. So, I mean, that must have been super exciting, I would guess.
It was really exciting. And also just when you look back on it, kind of bizarre that there was no video game industry. So no one had experience marketing video games, really. People who had come from Coleco or Atari or Mattel and television did have some, but in general, it was a new business. So it wasn't like other people had that much more experience in this field. But it was amazingly exciting to go. We launched in New York. So here are these people from Seattle area who are in New York hiring an agency, hiring a PR firm. We were doing mall tours, creating all the names of everything, the packaging identity. And now I just think, who would trust some 28-year-old to do this? I don't know.
That's crazy.
It was great.
It's great. I mean, what a cool opportunity. So since the Japanese team had a head start at marketing this, they were a few years ahead of you. What was your interaction with that team like? Were they helpful? Were you able to use some of their marketing ideas, or were you kind of Americanizing those ideas?
So it was completely different in Japan than the U.S. The system itself looks completely different. The identity looks different. And maybe they didn't, I've never studied whether they had a similar crash that we did. I don't think so. But the reason really that there was no influence from Japan is that the markets, before the internet or anything where people would globally get information at the same time, we really could handle markets in an isolated way. And in fact, even the ability to handle New York in an isolated way is pretty interesting. So we did New York, followed by LA, followed by national. And people outside New York didn't necessarily know about the product.
Wow. Isn't that, it's so crazy to think about the way that has changed how everybody does their job in every aspect of every type of business. We work differently now. So you were kind of able to test it out. I guess that's a luxury we just won't have again. So, okay, the NES, all very exciting. Then you go to Nintendo Power. Is that right?
Right. I think what happened is, as we were getting all of the installed systems, we would collect information on a warranty card. And a lot of people don't fill them out, but we were collecting quite a few names. And what we offered was, if you fill this out, you get a free newsletter / magazine. And when we got up to like 600,000 copies, it was really a drag on the marketing budget. And plus, it just showed interest from the consumer that they really were enjoying the information. And so we decided to launch a full subscription magazine. And the mission of the magazine was to make sure people enjoyed their games. They knew which game they wanted to buy, and they would get a lot of tips on how to finish their game. And so that we would say to extend the life of the category. At that time, we still thought another crash could happen if we didn't make sure that people felt good about what they spent their money on and that they enjoyed it, and that we really focused on quality of the gameplay.
Right. So at this point, could you take a step back and be like, wow, I was such an early employee at this company that has grown. At that point, did it seem like a big company? Or did it still feel intimate and small to you?
It was around 1987 that things started growing. The amount of customer service we had to have, the amount of deciding to have gameplay counselors all for the same mission statement, that kind of thing added a lot of headcount. The front office, because it wasn't a development company, never did grow that substantially. Like, surprisingly, maybe at the peak when I worked there, not counting the customer service areas, really was maybe a couple hundred. So,
wow,
it was.
That's surprising.
It wasn't a huge company. And Nintendo Power's co-publisher was a company in Japan called Tokuma Shoten. And the reason that we did that was they were having successful video game magazines, and their publishing models over there were so successful. If you've ever heard of kids reading tons of comic books, that kind of thing. And they had developed a way of making all those maps that people saw in Nintendo Power and capturing the information. So we would decide which games we wanted to focus on and gather up the artwork, and we would write the articles, but they would actually create the layout in Japan.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming at a company like Nintendo, there are translators all over the place and localizers all over. So was it, how difficult was it to then get your visions across to each other?
Well, so it wasn't that easy. So there's kind of a famous story. I hate even bringing it up for myself, but Howard Phillips, who was the guy that we used as a spokesperson because he really had a youthful appearance and he knew how to play every game. He was helping when we launched Nintendo Power. He was helping me with the creative development, and we went to Japan and they showed us all the layouts, and I didn't like them. And so we had a very short lead time, and I was really not liking things. And I was not liking them in a very American way. And
okay, and there's cultural differences, and we understand that. Yeah,
a woman who was, I am someone when I'm passionate about something, I am pretty direct. So I probably have learned something about cultural differences now, but definitely did not know. And so he one day said, "Don't worry about her. She's just a dragon lady," and that has really stuck. And
oh my,
any business that has worked with me from Japan associated with Nintendo has referred to that situation. But it was difficult. And in fact, the first art director walked out and quit. And someone else, Mr. Orimo, he said, someone else in the room said, I get what she wants, and stepped in, and it really made his career.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, but it's about figuring out who you gel with in any of these work circumstances. And I mean, it's not the first time we've heard a story about cultural differences confusing an issue or making people unhappy. And it's something I hopefully we're better at now.
Yeah, and you know what?
No more jelly donuts.
Yes, on all sides, hopefully people understand that there are cultural differences. So there were a lot of things about color and style and maybe even their interpretation of what an American audience would want, where they weren't hitting the mark. Mm-hmm. And so I think hopefully they also recognized that ultimately this situation going on for years and years, that we worked together, that they understood the differences.
Differences, right. Okay, we have to get to the Pokemon of it all because I'm too excited. So around, it's the mid-90s, are you starting to hear when do you start hearing the word Pokemon? And how was it pronounced when you heard it?
I don't know if it wasn't pronounced Pokemon, but it was. So it launched in Japan in 96. So I probably was hearing about it as a video game not too much longer after, maybe closer to 97. But because we were always aware in publishing of what was coming. So Nintendo of America was spending time, and I would go to big committee meetings of what are we going to do with this thing? This game is caught on. They're doing comics. They're doing a whole bunch of things. And Nintendo of America's marketing department was like, well, this will never work. And they started doing drawings and different things of different interpretations of the characters. We talked about whether the system would work better, like as a baseball game or some other referential thing. All the while, it's getting hotter and hotter. They start the TV show, all these things. And even Mr. Arakawa and some other executives who would spend their holidays in Hawaii were seeing kids from Japan just playing and playing and playing. So a decision was made that we're going to do it using the assets from Japan. We're not going to start over and do an Americanized version.
If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
Hey guys, Tara Sands here, and I want to let you know where Steve and I are going to be so we can meet you in person. I'll be at SabotenCon. I hope I said that right. August 30th to September 2nd. That's in the Phoenix area in Arizona. I'll have something in LA coming up in September. Heroes Hideout, Albany, New York at the end of September. And I'll be in the Houston area October 12th. You can check out our Instagrams and Twitters and all that to find out where we'll be. Steve is at Steve Yurko, and I am at Tara Sands VO. And we hope to meet you in person real soon. Thanks for listening. Got it. Yeah, I had read something about a graffiti style being tried out for the artwork.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I guess my other question would be, because we think we're so important in the U.S., but it's not just us. You know, you're Nintendo of America, but are you talking to Nintendo of Belgium or Spain, or is everybody going to be getting these as soon as Japan unleashes it on the world, or is it the U.S. first?
It always was the U.S. first, and sometimes Australia was lucky enough to get it pretty close to when we would, although there were some technical reasons, things that hooked to your television, et cetera, maybe had to be a different version. But basically, for a long time, the U.S. was responsible for international, non-Japanese content. And so
interesting. Okay.
It would go from Japan to the U.S., sometimes Australia, and then the U.S. would manage the European introduction with distributors over there.
Got it.
So, in fact, with Pokemon, we did the same. Nintendo of America was responsible for everything outside of Japan and Korea.
And from what I understand, this Pokemon thing they knew was going to be big, so they pulled you away from your work at Nintendo Power, and they were like, "We need Gail." Is that sort of what happened?
Wow, that would be so.
There was a battle
that
cry.
Would be so flattering. I have no idea, but yes, they said we want you to handle the Pokemon project. And with 4Kids, I wasn't licensing. Licensing was a different department. So although we were already working with 4Kids as our licensing agent on all Nintendo properties, I wasn't really directly involved in that at all. So I did know the 4Kids people, Al Kahn, Susan Eisner, because we'd worked with them forever, even in my marketing days. But I wasn't responsible for that area. But what Mr. Arakawa decided was that he wanted a department, or he wanted me to head up the idea of a funnel, right? Everything is funneled through this brand department, and then any contracts, approvals, anything else. So all the other departments continued to do their own job. The marketing department did their job, the PR department, the licensing department, and then it all just kind of flowed we were the conduit to what was coming from Japan, what was available. So it wasn't just working with 4Kids on both merchandise licensing and entertainment licensing, but it was also working with all the departments in Nintendo. So.
Right. Well, because there's also the card component, which which is another company that you're dealing with. It just seems like this thing has so many arms that how do you contain it? And I guess at first it's, it seems manageable, but my question is, so there has to kind of be a person at the top that's like overseeing everything to make sure everything's on brand. Is that the idea?
Yeah. And just to make sure there's a common focus on everything. And just to let you know, when I did move from publishing and to doing the Pokemon launch, when I did that, I said, well, this Pokemon thing is just one game, like we all had been saying, it might not work kind of thing. So it's not really that big of a job. So at the time, we were lacking leadership in the second party development area, meaning when we worked with other companies that were making a game specifically from the U.S. perspective, like a Ken Griffey Jr. baseball or those kinds of things. Okay. And so I also took over responsibility for what we call the treehouse. For a couple years, I had that area as well. Of course, Pokemon did grow so big that that was a silly thing to say. But anyway, that was also fun.
Then they were like, we need Gail. That's when it really happened. So one of my favorite things to ponder is, as this was all being adapted for an American audience, are the name changes of the Pokemon themselves. And I've read that there was like a team of localizers who worked on it, but I would like to think you were kind of hanging around and saw some of this happening. Is my dream coming true or no?
Well, keep in mind that when I started doing this in January, I believe, of 98, and the game launched in September. So the naming process, which is always the responsibility of Hiro Nakamura, was well underway. But it's such an interesting process. He did work on my team, but he would have to make 3 sets of names for each character and explain why those names represented the right parallel for sense of humor or ability of the character, like why Charizard is a fire lizard, why that specifically matched with what the lore that it was based on in Japan, because it's not always as straightforward as just that.
Right.
And initially, the characters in Game Boy, you don't really hear them speak or say anything, even though in the TV show, they only say a version of their name.
Oh, I know. So, that was my job.
Yeah. So not only did we have to have a localized name, but a localized syllable. And
well, but see, that was my question, because I played Bulbasaur.
Nice.
And well, yeah, except that in Japanese he says Dane, 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 and then we would try to fit Bulbasaur. So it was the 3 syllables. But I think Bulbasaur is such a good name. So was that the decision making process? Like, okay, different syllables, but the perfect name? Was it kind of one of those things?
So Hiro Nakamura wasn't focused on that, because like I said, he would make 3 sets of names. So then it just became your problem and Norman and Kathy and Michael Hagney.
Yeah.
You'd have to win that you guys called it the Flappy. You had to win the Flappy award.
Yes.
I know.
Oh, you know about our Flappies. I know,
yeah.
We thought that was very top secret. Well, you're an honorary Flappy winner then. So Hiro made basically 450 options of names, because from the first 150, and then who was the final decision maker?
Game Freak, the company that makes the games and programs. It makes the games themselves, and that's the heritage of the actual characters, what they look like, what they do. All the other things, whether it's TV or the cards or something else, come from that. So
Game Freak was the ultimate decider
of
basically.
What the names will be.
Satoshi himself was actually making these decisions.
Probably
I like to
Mr.
think.
Masuda, Mr. Sugimori, those people whose names people...
I shouldn't call him by his first name. I know that.
Yeah,
so,
Mr. Tajiri was involved early on, and we had some meetings with him. But I think when it got so big and kind of unmanageable, he was less involved, and their company got bigger, and there were people. It was only for a few years that my group was involved with management. And then they started a company called the Pokémon Company, which had all the people to review things like that. And
right. But they weren't in the U.S. yet.
Ultimately, they did start a Pokemon U.S. office.
Right. I think around 2004.
Yeah, in New York and then in Bellevue.
So in these early days, I love knowing about focus groups and testers and all that. I'm sure there was a lot going on. Were kids also involved in the testing and focus groups?
Wow, I'm going to have to think about that. I worked in a whole bunch of focus groups for the NES, but now I'm trying to remember if we even did focus groups. We were moving so fast,
Right. I know 4Kids did for the anime, so maybe that was all put on them. Maybe that wasn't even part of your responsibility.
No, if they did it, we would have been involved. We wouldn't have let them show children without us being involved. I just don't remember.
That's fair. Yeah. Okay. So Pokemon slowly starts happening. Was there a moment where you're like, oh, this is real. This is a big deal.
For me, we launched in the fall, and we had all these crazy tactics with the yellow Volkswagen Beetles and all kinds of grassroots things where we were introducing kids to the property. And the show was actually placed, as we talked about earlier, kind of in after school programming, market by market. 4Kids did that. And it's what's called barter syndication. That's where you could barter your ad dollars, barter Nintendo's ad dollars in exchange for them putting the show on the air. So 4Kids had people in-house that managed that process. And so what I'm getting to is, of course, we were watching the ratings as we could, but we were in about 80 markets. A couple of different TV networks came calling and wanted to take the show national, network-wide. That was probably in the spring of 1999. That really was when I felt like it was really happening. Of course, the games...
Right, when they're coming to you.
They go to 4Kids, and Al would...
No, I mean, but they were, instead of you seeking them out,
beating our door down and competing for the rights. And
that feels good.
We only had a few things in 1998, a few things that launched, the very early launch of the cards, Hasbro, almost no toys, and Kentucky Fried Chicken did a Happy Meal type of program, a kids meal program that didn't work. And
it was too soon, right? I mean, that's what I sort of understood.
Right, that it was too soon. The toys weren't great anyway. So starting in the first quarter, when we were going to Toy Fair and when we were, getting Kids WB was ultimately the winner of the bid for the show. That really, made me feel like it was a multimedia property that was happening.
Right. I mean, what Norman had said to us was even that first getting it on the air was so difficult because, again, it had the seizure thing around it. It had the stigma from that. So what a relief to have a bidding war not that long after. I mean, that must have been...
Yeah, that's funny. That, I guess it's episode 38, Never to Be Seen Again. That's what I think it is.
That's buried somewhere in a
Thanks
vault.
for reminding me of the KFC campaign. That was very early on. It was from what I remember, it was just like 4 plushes but it was the most random assortment of characters. Do you recall at all,
I don't
like whose
recall
choice
it
it
being
was?
plush, but if it was, wow, those I bet on eBay. I'd like to have some, and I'd like to. Very rare.
It was like it was 4 characters you would not expect. It's like none of the popular ones, none of the starters or anything like that. And I think I just now, like, the memories about that flooded back. I was just curious who made the choices to do Seal and Zubat and a couple others. I forget who they were.
And I think
don't ever
what I will
them.
say early on is to understand what was going to happen in the TV show and what characters beyond. I think that for Nintendo, when you think, oh, the first 3 the starter characters, those are like the baby characters. People want, the marketing department would have been like, oh, we want to offer up, more aggressive, scarier, bigger, kind of characters that would hit a boy 12 to 14 market, rather than the starter characters. And that was definitely off base. And later, I'll tell you, when we launched Silver and Gold, we had a lot of big meetings with all these companies that were making products, and we changed the color palette to kind of teal and orange, and we chose the Typhlosion or these other characters, and it didn't work. Only the traditional, like, red, blue color scheme with the original starters, and even the original starters you still, and of course Pikachu, but you still see out there today as kind of the merchandising lead. But
it's so true.
Other properties had been so successful with refreshing every year. We were really looking at things like Power Rangers, and anyway, it didn't work.
So when you say it didn't work, like, so you get this new color palette, is the only way to really test that to send it to market, or is there copious testing of like, I'm just curious about the process of deciding finally on what colors?
So working with 4Kids, the woman in the art department, Susan Simpson, we came up with a new style guide. And I think I'm sure that I was participating in what would, differentiate that we were having the newest, latest thing. It was just too soon. Like when now I think of it, it's so confusing. Like, you can't move all the toys off the shelf and then just have the new toys, or all the T-shirts aren't gone and then the new T-shirts. And also, if you approve a design that has a 3-year deal, let's say someone sends in and gets 10 T-shirts approved, you could, but you don't really go back and say, we are unapproving these 10 best-selling T-shirts. Like, until their
you don't retract
until their contract runs out, most of the things that they have approved are approved. So it was very interesting how that evolves. I'm not sure how other brands or companies do manage to clear the shelves and go with Shrek 3 if it's happening right away.
Right. We spoke to someone in the licensing department at 4Kids who was saying that they tried to sell certain things with only the human characters, and it didn't work. Like, unless a Pokemon themselves was on the product, like a T-shirt or a toothbrush, were there any other quirks like that you noticed? Like, well, this Pokemon doesn't move merch, but this one does, or this human, was anything interesting or quirky that you saw?
Yeah, I think other than Ash and the Ash symbol for the hat, and a little bit Misty when you try to get some female product. But for example, Brock, that's a no. Like that it just didn't go that far. Even
it just wasn't happening. Brock.
And then of course Brock left the series, so that's a big deal. But also, then you can't have Brock stuff out there when there's no Brock.
Right. Well, there's this one kid pining away for Brock merch. Were collectors on your radar at all as people who might be buying this stuff? Or was it really just super kid focused and collectors were not an issue?
Only for the cards, I'd say. For the trading. And we had two licensees at the time because we were following a pattern that happened in Japan. There were Topps TV cards where it was just collect cards that have animation visuals on them. And then Wizards of the Coast was marketing the trading card game. So really it was the trading card game that, even though it was meant to be played, that was what people were collecting. And of course the Holo Charizard is like the iconic card. And I think even little kids, they could tell that it was powerful based on the number of hit points it had. And they would know that it was a strong card, even if they didn't know how to play. They would just look at what number was on it. And also they know that if it's a holo card, that it's also important.
Valuable.
Right.
Well, I love that you brought up the Topps cards, because now I bring some of those to conventions because, the episode, like there's featured episodes in them. And now those are more expensive than the trading cards because they weren't as popular. People probably didn't hold on to those the same way. So there's like a flip.
Yeah, at some point, we pretty early on, we stopped doing the cards. We did several series, but it was always very difficult to send them to Japan for approval, which was really confusing because it was just simply TV art and information. But in the end, and even today, they felt that having two types of cards, that it competed with the trading card game in a way, even though they had done it at one time in Japan, they had wished that we hadn't done it. And so it didn't continue. So those are more rare and older.
Yeah, that's really interesting that's why, because it does, obviously it's competitive. So speaking of approval process, we spoke to Waldo Cabrera, who is in the licensing and art department, and he was saying that like once the show kind of took off, they couldn't even keep up with how much licensing was going on. Like literally they hired his whole family to just sign off on like the toothbrushes and shirts and lunchboxes. But I guess my question is, when a lunchbox got made, 4Kids was in charge of that, but then would they also have to send the lunchbox to you? And then did Japan also have to approve the lunchbox?
Pretty much yes to all. So what the process is first the salespeople, the licensing salespeople would make a deal with a company. Let's say the lunchbox was being made by Thermos. Thermos would say, they would go to Thermos. Thermos would say, I want to do a deal for Pokemon lunchboxes. They would then create what was called a deal memo that they had agreed with Thermos. This is what you'll pay, and this is what you want to do. And then they send to Nintendo that, quote, deal memo and what's called like quality samples. This is so technical, but they would send the samples. So we would get Power Rangers lunchboxes, Disney lunchboxes, whatever. And then what the offer was, how many countries they're doing it in, how long it is, how much money they're going to pay. And that part could be approved at Nintendo. So it would go to the licensing department. And then I think once a week, maybe twice a week, someone would sit with me and we would review the deals and decide we wanted to work with that company to make those products. That didn't involve Japan. Where it got sticky is then, having had the authority to approve Topps trading cards, now Japan hates Topps trading cards. And right. So then they're like, Gail, what are you doing? Why are you approving Topps? And I'm like, you had Bandai trading cards. I don't know why this is an issue. So
you started an international incident.
Exactly. Yeah. So that would happen. And then after that, the art department gave them the style guide and they would submit the lunchbox with the art on it. Then that would have to come to Nintendo and that would need Japanese approval.
I see. So it is a big process, especially today, that process would probably be a lot faster. I'm sure this felt very tedious back then.
I don't know. It's just kind of the way it is. Nintendo also, when 4Kids would send, let's say, we could approve things at Nintendo, like T-shirts, what we would call 2D versus 3D. But if someone was sending a figural Mario toy,
Oh, you have to see
we
that.
would
Yeah.
have to send it to Japan, and it would sometimes take
Yeah.
a long time. And so the licensing department at Nintendo was familiar with that same process on our own characters.
Right. Well, and that's what I was going to ask too. Did certain companies only get the rights to license certain characters because it worked within their brand? Like I was talking about, Oddish was a marshmallow shape, and I was so excited. But it's because Oddish worked as a marshmallow shape, whereas certain characters wouldn't look good in a marshmallow form. So were there just like wacky things that would arrive at your doorstep, or did certain companies where you like, no, macaroni can absolutely not be Mr. Mime? Or, I mean, I don't know. I just assumed there must have been funny conversations happening.
One kind of, we did originally think that the character should align with their, not ability, what do you call it? So, for example, water Pokemon. Bath toys should be water Pokemon. But that actually didn't end up sticking, that it really was the starter characters, Pikachu, et cetera. The favorite characters ended up being what people wanted to license. Though there are some funny things, like they wouldn't allow candles then, as far as I understand it. They still don't, because there's characters. The candles have characters. And then when they melt, it distorts the character. So you could make a candle holder that the candle could go in, but not the, and so there's a lot of things like that they had really put a lot of thought into the integrity of the characters.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's having control. Yeah, I get that. So this was my question. When you first started working with 4Kids, was it a 10-year license or a 5-year? I've heard different varying stories of how long your contract was with 4Kids to license the show and the products. Do you know how long it was?
So not talking about Pokemon, but just in general, because 4Kids had been our licensing agency, that's just an agency agreement. When you have an agency agreement, you can choose. It probably says, given 90 days by either party, and there were a whole bunch of things that neither of you can violate. So Nintendo of America had an agency agreement with 4Kids. Separate from that, there were different pieces of the Pokemon franchise that had different contracts, and I don't want to be legally quoted, but I think there was something that had like 20 years. And but yeah, 4Kids, if Nintendo getting all the rights to Pokemon, to everything Pokemon, then 4Kids continued to represent it as our agency, our exclusive agency. But the merchandise rights, which was what they always had for Nintendo characters, would have been different than the animation, and different from when we signed on with WB, or different than when we signed a movie contract. So there was an ongoing series of contracts that had to happen. The trading card game was actually part of the merchandise rights. So even though once we got started, 4Kids wasn't involved with the trading card game, Nintendo of America was doing the localization process and working directly with Wizards of the Coast and the people in Japan on approvals as a separate kind of project. But it was part of the merchandise rights.
Okay. So I have to ask too, was there fear giving your show over to 4Kids, who was their entertainment division was still pretty new? Norman was still pretty young. They had just come off of a wrestling show. Do you remember if there was any hesitation about trusting them with this new property?
You know what? They were instrumental. I wasn't in all the meetings. I was in some of the meetings. But Al had a very good relationship with Mr. Arakawa and Howard Lincoln. And so I think as businesses, they really they decided to do this together. They decided the reason we could do it is that we could do it together. So not meaning to hand out like so much flattery or something, but
no.
But I think that's why it wasn't to consider, Gail Tilden's never done any of these things anyway, but it wasn't that whether or not they themselves had an animation or localization expertise, but they would either sub out that expertise on our behalf or, build the team or whatever. It was just the confidence that we would do this together.
Yeah, that's nice to hear too, because again, with so few places today, I feel like taking risks and doing that, it's nice to hear that the trust was built and they were like, maybe they're young, but we trust them. And I mean, like you said, the employees at all these companies were super young. They seemed old to me at the time, but I'm like, wait, no, they definitely were not.
Yeah, the merchandise licensing was their expertise, but they also did have this media placement group where, like I said, with barter syndication and advertising with, I don't know if you know Tom Kenny or Shelley Hirsch, but those people were instrumental. Mm-hmm. So localizing the animation was probably not top of mind at that time as one of the more difficult tasks or more meaningful tasks. Because Nintendo of America localized video games all the time. I don't know. Somehow I think even though it did become such a huge part of why it was successful, there were other aspects that 4Kids maybe a deeper experience in that we were trusting them on.
Okay. We're not going to keep you forever. I have a few more questions. What we had heard is that in early days, because the role of Ash was voiced by a female, that the company, and I don't know if this was a 4Kids issue or a Nintendo or whatever issue, they were afraid to let her do any press because they didn't want kids to find out that Ash was voiced by a female. Do you remember any conversations around this or when that changed?
We definitely had conversations because Norman and I would work together on the promotion of any of the animated components of the brand. Mm-hmm. Gail Tilden always thought it would be a good idea that Bart Simpson's a woman.
I agree.
Bart Simpson's a woman. I don't see what the issue is, whatever. But I think the contracts and the way you guys all worked as voice actors, and in Japan, it's true that people don't get individual credit for anything. You don't. The woman who plays Pikachu did have some level of celebrity, but whether it's creating video game or anything else, people don't get promoted or buy lines or all this stuff.
Right.
So I don't think that's why he did it, but he followed that philosophy also, that he felt that it wasn't beneficial to the show or the brand. And you know what? Cons were really new at that time. There was Comic-Con, not even New York Comic-Con.
It was totally different.
And now the idea that people want panels and they want autographs. And I was involved in the My Little Pony franchise for a while. Uh-huh. Those people, Tara Strong, huge. Wow, she's like...
Yeah, huge. Yeah, so, I mean, I'm glad you kind of said that too, because as actors there, I think we felt a little detached from it all, but I think that is another cultural thing. Like in the credits, it didn't say who people played, and I think... and fans get annoyed because they're like, well, did you voice this? I'm like, I have no idea. But again, that goes back to the cultural differences and retaining certain things and letting go of other things. So I'm actually glad we spoke about that. And you're right. Today it's totally different. Fans want to know exactly who does everything.
We cared. We cared too much.
Steve was watching. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was a good idea. I thought even things like having famous voice actors in the movies would be a good idea at some point, and et cetera. But Norman always won that argument with me. So that's where we were.
What about Pokemon Live? Were you around for that?
Of course. Yeah.
So what were your thoughts on this? So for those listening who don't know, Pokemon Live was a live musical show, like with Broadway aspirations based on Pokemon. So have at it.
I'm not sure about Broadway aspirations. It was like Disney on Ice aspirations.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
At least for me. So yeah, we definitely thought, hey, why not make a live touring live show? This brand is so hot that, why not do that? And we were in the UK for the launch of movie one, and we managed to get the senior executive of Pokémon to come with us back to the hotel to pitch the idea without his 25 surrounding minions. And he agreed to do it. And especially big was the idea that this Mecha Mewtwo character was a created Pokemon, if you will. That was huge. But I really, of course, every aspect that brought something new to my career was awesome. And I loved going back there. I got to stand on the stage at Radio City Music Hall, and, we would go and we had someone from Japan that was a subcontractor who helped approve all the models of the characters.
Right, because you couldn't send those big things to Japan. I was going to say, like, you needed someone on site. It wasn't like you could ship over a life-size Pikachu. So
I loved it. I loved it so much. And, music was a big part of the franchise early on. And the To Be a Master album, was gold. I have a gold record on my wall at home. And it was, I loved it. I loved the music to it. I thought it was fun. But you know what? Kind of when you're working on something, maybe was it too much of a vanity project? I don't know. But it didn't do very well in any city. And gold and silver were coming out. And I got Mr. Arakawa to agree to let me do a pre-sale to actually let kids get the game early at the show, that we would have it for sale at the show.
Oh, that's a great way to pitch it. Yeah.
And it just wasn't that successful. I don't know. People didn't know if it was because parents didn't like Pokemon. I thought it was weird or confusing and didn't want to go pay to take their kids or what. But I loved it.
It's tough to know because I guess it's interesting too, because I was just at a convention where we were right near a Frozen on Ice, and that demographic, like if it was, those were very little kids, and maybe the kids watching the show are slightly older. Maybe it just wasn't the sweet spot of age-wise or something.
Yeah, and if it's a slightly male skew, maybe they didn't want to go to a musical. But it's hard to say, but I loved it. And, we took some footage to make a video. We never fully developed it. And when I say we, of course, 4Kids Productions. And
Norman said that footage is lost, unfortunately. He said they did do a very expensive filming of it. That is nowhere to be found, which we brought up to Andrew Rannells, who played James, and he was okay with it being lost footage.
I know, that's so funny. But what would happen is, so for example, on that project, we were pitching it to Japan, but Nintendo and 4Kids were partners. So yes, the footage got lost, but I approved something that Nintendo paid for.
Yeah, well,
that we didn't get.
That's power.
Yeah, but that we didn't get. So that was kind of disappointing. But are you familiar with the fact that the costumes have ended up somewhere in Canada in a basement somewhere, and they're kind of getting ruined, but the theater is owned by a city, someone who repossessed a theater or something. And so no one can actually get to them or try to salvage them or do anything with them.
And that's so heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. It is.
We have one of the big lights that they sold at the show. Someone donated to the podcast. We'll probably try to do something with it for charity. But do you have any fun souvenirs from that experience?
I have a Mecha Mewtwo card. Definitely.
Okay, good. Okay.
And I don't know if I have anything else from the show.
Did you keep style guides or things like that? Like, were you someone who collected this stuff, or were you like, I'll never need this again, no one will ask, and threw it out?
I have a very small amount of things. When 4Kids went public, Alcon gave me the medallion that you get when you're at the stock exchange.
That's cool.
So I still have the 4Kids medallion.
That's very cool.
It's stuff like that was meaningful to me for work. I have things like framed. I thought it was funny recently. they did a series of covers, Pokemon covers, and on a magazine. And we originally did them with Reader's Digest, and I have the 4 framed Reader's Digest covers.
Well, that just came out again as the 25th anniversary.
I saw it at the grocery store.
So you were also part of Kirby, which was also a 4Kids property. What was your involvement with that? And weren't you too busy doing Pokemon?
It just kind of dovetailed with when they started Pokemon International and started their own company. So we continued to do the video game marketing and be part of the circle of companies that were what we call the tent poles of animation, trading cards, video games, and so we were still involved, but we were not managing the brand. And then during some small period of time, Wizards of the Coast license had expired. And so we took over marketing of the trading card game until they could get their the company together and the ability to ship to all the distribution with Pokemon themselves. So those were the kinds of things I was involved with then. Kirby is created by HAL Lab, great, really fun people. And they had a show with 100 episodes. And we were really excited. Kirby, the mission of Kirby as a property and a character was to create a game that was a little bit easier and that it would allow people to finish the game and feel more satisfied with their experience. And so that show and that team, which they call themselves Warp Star, the people, which is Kirby has the Warp Star. And so it was really fun. Actually, the most fun thing about that show was the creation of the introductory music, which is Kirby, 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 and it's very swing style.
So good.
And we discussed it at length of let's do something completely different than what was happening with Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, etc.
Hey, it's Tara jumping in here to tell you, yes, of course, I did ask her afterwards if she knew who sang that Kirby theme song, since so many of us have been trying to figure out who the singer is. But unfortunately, she did not know. Okay, back to the interview.
And then the character, what's its name? It's like a snail character, I think. Anyway.
Escargoon. Escargoon.
Escargoon.
I believe I knew that.
I wanted a character, I wanted them to try a voice that sounded like Paul Lynn from Hollywood.
That's what it is.
Boys.
Ted Lewis. Yeah.
And so we ended up with that voice. But I was much more
involved.
Is
that Ted Lewis's wheelhouse. Yeah. That voice just comes right out of him. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And then we could use the show to, help. The games and the show in the case of Kirby don't line up as exactly. But it does help, to bring a lot more awareness to the Kirby brand and et cetera. So it was really fun. I loved doing that.
Right. So I have to ask too, because I know that 4Kids had a contract with you guys saying they would not get involved in any other card-based series or projects. And then they kind of acquired Yu-Gi-Oh! And I had read that they kind of sweet-talked you into letting them do that. Were you part of this whole thing? Or was this a big issue for Nintendo?
I think, did Al sweet talk me into doing that? I think he was in a panic that he wanted to do it. We were at a show.
He really wanted the show. Yeah.
We were at a show like licensing show or something like that. And they were in one room and I was in a room or whatever. Anyway, the sentiment was if 4Kids is managing both brands, they will have an incentive to balance and keep them both hot. And do I think that's really true? I don't know. But anyway, that was the sentiment that I also repeated to the Konami people. And Nintendo, it was also a video game company. And so we did have an agreement that they weren't to do any other video game companies without our approval. And they did a Sega, they did a Sonic show too. But I don't know how much. I remember me getting the, let's, make sure they know if you let them do this and we can balance it. And if someone else does it, could go head to head and cannibalize. And
Right.
that
Yeah,
was
I mean,
the
I was
message.
curious if that led to them not keeping the license, but the truth is I assume that really just happened because Pokemon USA happened, and they then had a presence and an office in the US. Is that sort of how that all happened?
Yeah, when they had a presence in their office, they would, it's also, of course, it's a business, and I'm
Right.
not privileged to all of their situation, but deciding how they wanted to continue to move forward, and whether it was with the cards or with the
Right.
licensing or with the show. I mean, now Pokemon has, I don't know if I'm correct, but like something like 1,500 people work there. They do all of these tasks themselves directly, not through agencies.
It's all in-house. Yeah.
It's all in-house. I don't, I'm not close with anyone particularly there, but I have a friend who still works on the brand, and yeah, it's a huge endeavor. So they did end up
Yes.
ultimately doing everything themselves.
My last question, though, is about all the contests and promos and ads. I assume that you were involved in all that kinds of stuff. Like 4Kids was known for having wacky promos. Was that kind of stuff, did that need approval? Like when the characters sing the national anthem, did you have to say, is Ash allowed to sing the national anthem?
I think sometimes it was just so, I don't know what you'd call it, but sometimes it's just so like wild territory that you don't even think about. Am I supposed to think about Ash singing the national? But they earlier on, it would just be a reel would come in with a whole bunch of promos or something, and just take a look and make sure that nothing seemed
No nudity. Yeah.
Yeah, something, but they weren't doing that anyway. So it didn't really, probably the harder thing to manage was when we were in Kids WB would do a lot of things, and, they didn't want to have to get approvals. So
okay.
it would, sometimes other companies or people would do stuff without running it past. And then you'd get a question from someone in Japan, why are they doing this? And you're like, I didn't even see it,
Oh, interesting. Okay. So can you tell us what you've been up to since leaving Nintendo?
Yeah, right after I left Nintendo, it wasn't really the best time to be decided. I had been there 24 years. And if you had been there 20 years and your age and your years of service add up to 70, you could retire. So at 50, I thought, I'm going to go do some other things. But in 2008 happened, and it was not a good time to be looking. So I had gotten involved with a friend who had helped us with the Pokemon trading card game. And we had a lot of licenses, like the My Little Pony license, and we're working with Hasbro. We did stuff with companies from Build-A-Bear, Boo the Dog, all kinds of things. Created my own brand called Muddles, which was cute puppies that were like Labradoodles and that kind of thing. And we were making impulse product, so trading card game, trading cards. But that section of the store, like at Walmart or Target, for example, it kind of evolved into a lot of blind bag toys. So you might be getting collecting a series of dog tags, or you're collecting backpack hangers or something like that. So I was involved with that for almost 10 years. And then now I'm happily not doing much except when people like you call me.
That's the life. You put your time in. And I have to ask too, like, do people, I assume you don't introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Gail Tilden. I'm very responsible for Pokemon coming to this country. But do people know, and are they so excited to hear about your history? Because obviously anime is just so huge now, and I have to thank you and these people for having the vision to bring it here. So in your day-to-day life, does this stuff come up?
Let me just say one more time, the vision is Mr. Arakawa, the president of Nintendo of America, was willing to risk everything to make that happen. So it wasn't my money and it wasn't my risk taking, but thank you.
But it was your hours of work.
I
have to say that too. You put a lot of hours of your life into this.
Yeah. But, I don't know. When I'm at a con or something like that, just as a visitor, someone might see my badge or something and say something, or people send me random things on Facebook and say, you don't know how meaningful Nintendo Power was to me growing up, waiting for it to come in the mail. Things like that made me really happy to hear.
Well, on behalf of all of them, and again, when I do go to these conventions, I explain that I am a cog in this big Pokemon wheel, and it's the people who were there full time like you that should be signing autographs. So on their behalf, thank you so much, and thank you for sitting here with us and taking the time.
You are very welcome. Apologies to my dog. That's what keeps me busy, if you were hearing him bark. So
no, I like the ambiance of a dog barking. It makes it more real. She was a delight, and what a cool piece of history she got to witness. So fascinating.
Yeah, basically the rise of Nintendo is just like a staple in every home. Because came in the era where Nintendo was all about arcades, and then just from the NES onwards, like that is like a hell of a time period, and
right,
and like very much involved, and with a lot of history there and a lot to say, and hanging on every word.
Yeah, and again, like I forget that Seattle was not the hub we think of it today as, and like getting a job like that there was an anomaly at that time. So I'm
guessing, like over the years now, like I think you're seeing more than, I mean, what little I know from working in the industry, but it seems like, like Seattle now, and it's like Texas, sort of, maybe it's always been like that. I just haven't been aware, but I feel like a lot more of these big companies are like, oh no, that's all up in this state that you probably never thought of.
Yeah, totally. And one of the things that I had read in Monster Kids book, and we will have the author, Daniel Dockery, is that correct?
Yeah.
We should have him on at some point. We just have so many people to talk to. It's tough. But that Pokemon initially, I mean, the whole concept of the show, I guess, was to be a musical. This was before she would have started working on it, so I didn't ask her about it. But the fact that, I think the idea got nixed pretty quickly, but I love that music was initially part of the plan.
For the anime?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, I could be misquoting that, but there was definitely music involved in the show in some way. And then I was also reading about why how the manga never really came over to the States at all. Because it had like some filthy stuff in it, apparently. Like it was a little R-rated.
There's two different versions. I mean, there's like two different adaptations. There's one that's like very readily available now. If you go into Barnes & Noble, you'll see those. And then the ones, those were the single issues. I had those. It was by a well-known hentai artist, and
you had the Japanese versions of these, because
no,
version
English
never happened.
No,
I thought
they adapted these. Are you talking about there might be another one, but there was the English released ones that they had to edit, and it was like a loose adaptation of the anime.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's a question for the author of the book then, because. And again, my reading comprehension
I was just talking to Dan earlier today. If I would have known, I would have asked.
We got to schedule him. We'll get on that.
For sure. But I don't know.
There's so much to know.
I guess I'm a Nintendo fanboy. So like I was very interested in hearing about a lot of the history here. And Nintendo Power was great. It's one of those things I miss. Magazines, I guess they're still around, but.
I mean, she's a person that should be on every panel at every convention.
Hopefully,
not me.
Yeah. I mean, she, humble at least. She's not taking credit for like everything here, but like she played a major part in all this stuff. And
yeah. Well, listen, I mean, and again, I understand that she wasn't the final decision or all that stuff, but learning that industry, it was, like she said, a brand new industry, and she happened to be very good at it. Like, I'm sure not everyone kept their job there for that long. Like, she survived there for a very long time and thrived. So, she shouldn't be so humble, but I appreciate that she is. The other thing that I read about in the book, that she was not, I'll probably cut it because she was not aware of it, was a band called Johto that Nintendo tried to put together, I believe, or I think it was before the creation of it was way before the creation of the 4Kids 5. I'm going to have to dig more, but I do remember Russ Velasquez in his interview from the music department talking about a band that was not 4Kids 5 that he could not remember much about. So I'm guessing it's this band Johto that I think they thought would like tour doing songs from the show.
Right.
So that's another interesting avenue that we haven't really gone down, but
tying all these together on our cork board with strings. Yeah, definitely. I think one of these days I'm going to revisit Monster Kids, freshen up, because I listened to the audiobook like right around the time we were starting the show. So
yeah, I would have loved to hear the audiobook narration, but I realized that I needed to take notes. As I read it, I had to take notes, and I was like, I'm never going to, because I wanted to get the spellings of names correct. Because, even just reading the book, I was like, I couldn't stop researching the show. And as I'm reading the book, I'm like looking up people on LinkedIn to see if they're still alive and if they could possibly
do
talk
what my
to
dad
us.
used to do, just take a highlighter to it and just everything you need to know. Yeah.
But see, I realized that if I did that, I would never go back and then take the notes. Because if I had a highlighter, I'd have to then sift.
Right.
I don't get that process as much. Because I was literally inputting it into a document.
Yeah, I'm a collector. I wouldn't want to tarnish anything. I've only just come around to like finally putting stickers on things. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I tarnished it because I first started reading it on a plane and I didn't have access to something, so I started writing on the back, like inside cover. So I ruined the book. So I won't have Daniel sign that version. But all right, you guys, you've stuck around. You've listened. We appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's a little bit of a departure from a 4Kids employee, which I love. I enjoy hearing their perception of 4Kids and how it was to work with 4Kids from the outside. So thank you to Gail Tilden. If you are still listening, you should stop what you're doing. Go to our show page on whatever app you're listening to. Rate it 5 stars because Gail is a 5-star guest. And then even if you're feeling super inspired, write a really cool, nice review. Say who your favorite guest was. Please. Yeah. Sorry, I should have prefaced that.
No, I'm sugarcoating it at this point. I'm just
sugarcoat it all.
I'm giving the eyes.
But we do appreciate you guys.
On mic.
Yeah, we'll have lots of cool new stuff for you and for Steve.
And we'll catch you next time. Oh, do you not want me to say that?
I don't know. I thought you were going to say the Patreon.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And if if the charm is working, go over to our Patreon and just give us like $5 a month, and then you get even more stuff. You get to hear more from us.
Bonus content. Oh, you know what it was? I was working on a song that goes subscribe, rate, and review. Subscribe, rate, and review. It's a little jazz number I'm working on.
Oh, yeah, just like Kirby.
Kirby right back at you. So like when you've stopped listening, like if you didn't stop the way I told you, you can start singing. Subscribe, rate, and review. You can snap your fingers to it. Subscribe, rate, and review. If you like this show, you know what to do. Just subscribe, rate, and review. Everybody. No. I wrote a song, you guys. I'm no John Siegler. So we will.
Catch you next time.
4Kids Flashback is a production of Maji Media, hosted by Tara Sands and Steve Yurko.
Producers are Zach Logan, Tara Sands, and Steve Yurko.
For more information, go to 4kidsflashback.com. That is the number 4. And if you worked at 4Kids and have a story you want to share, please email us at 4kidsflashback@gmail.com.
You can find us on social media at 4Kids Flashback, and to listen early and ad-free, head to patreon.com/4kidsflashback. And for podcast merchandise, find links on our website and Linktree.
As they say on every podcast, if you liked this show, please subscribe, rate, and review, and tell your friends or 4. If you want to check out other Maji Media podcasts, go to maji.media. Thanks for listening.